Hi. I've been thinking for the last, very long time. I'm just going to speak. In the myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, Camus writes, "Man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." Just postulating on that a little bit and adding, I was kind of in a Reddit post and I saw someone write an interesting interpretation of Camus' writing where he says, "I think that last line, the drama necessarily ends with logic, suggests that one cannot resolve this with logic and that the drama of human life is destroyed by logic, which pretends to resolve it, either by positing a dogmatic meaning or by positing a nihilistic lack of it." Okay, and I'm just going to read a passage quickly. By the way, I don't have to. Some of this stuff I'm going to be thinking about on the fly, but I'm just going to read. I'm just going to read a little bit. All right. Camus writes, "If the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy. The word is not too much. Again, I fancy Sisyphus returning towards his rock, and the sorrow was in the beginning. When the images of earth cling too tightly to memory, when the call of happiness becomes too insistent, it happens that melancholy rises in man's heart. This is the rock's victory. This is the rock itself. The boundless grief is too heavy to bear. These are our nights of Gethsemane. But crushing truths perish from being acknowledged. Thus, Oedipus at the outset obeys fate without knowing it. But from the moment he knows, his tragedy begins. Yet at the same moment, blind and desperate, he realizes that the only bond linking him to the world is the cool hand of a girl. Then a tremendous remark rings out. Despite so many ordeals, my advanced age and the nobility of my soul make me conclude that all is well. Sophocles, Oedipus, like Dostoevsky's Kirillov, thus gives the recipe for the absurd victory. Ancient wisdom confronts modern heroism." Of course, I'm just going to read the last paragraph from a very important book, Myth of Sisyphus, which is, of course, about Sisyphus being fated by the gods to roll a rock up for eternity up and down a hill and finding meaning in that. "I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth, without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." Let's do it. The main themes I'm pulling on today will be about tragedy, Greek tragedy, comedy, kind of Shakespearean comedy, and the important thinkers and narrative writers, specifically Kafka, Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, Albert Camus, a little bit of Sartre, and a little bit Nietzsche, I guess, and Dostoevsky. Okay, so uh, I just watched Louis Theroux's documentary called Inside the Manosphere on Netflix, and I thought it was rather revealing, very revelatory about the state of today's society and the world. and I thought he did an excellent job. I didn't know he went to modeling college, so obviously great hands there, which I might speak about a little bit. And the this modeling college is known for being very, it's probably the most anti kind of manosphere college at Oxford. So there's obviously like a sentiment that kind of affects the notion of free will in his reporting. But I don't want to talk too much about that, even though it's very actually important. I want to talk about the Piers Morgan and HStikkytokky or Harrison Sullivan interview that happened literally yesterday or 2 days ago, and the walk off there, and how this all applies to this deep kind of conversations where I'm bringing these philosophers of Kierkegaard and Camus. Okay, let's do it. Question. I've always questioned in my life. I'm the son of I'm the son of a multimillionaire, and I've always felt inadequate. And I come from a great family with people in it trying to have very high ambitions. I've had people from all over the world. I've had an incredible life, but I've always felt kind of empty inside. And lots of sleepless nights and thinking about what the hell the meaning is of life and reason for anything is. And I feel like I have broken into some serious ground today with all this. And it all is predicated on Albert Camus and Sartre's kind of notion of the absurd. And the absurd is how Camus describes it, is the confrontation between man's logical desire to fulfill happiness and their prerogatives and duties in the world, and then the chaotic and the confrontation between that and the chaotic kind of winds of fate and the silence of the world, or the chaos in the world, the destruction of the world. I mean, look at today, right? The wars of the world, and how we can make a sense of meaning when the fundamental things just don't add up, right? And that friction, and he was talking a little bit about the atoms of the rock there, which I think is also very important. I always talk about continuous improvement and Kaizen, which is very important, but it's obviously going to be a notion of continuous improvement towards what ideal, right? It's not just continuous improvement for what's sake, although there is merit to that proclamation. The important thing I need to mention right now is eudaimonia, which is this Greek term which means human flourishing. And it's quite ambiguous to define, obviously, because a lot of things get lost in translation over time. But it is a very important thing, and it's very distinct from Nietzsche's view of the Übermensch, the overman, kind of becoming the best version of yourself, a predatory hawk. And then we start to kind of go down that trail of the Machiavellian, you must act like a fox or a lion when you can. And there's lots of kind of pockets you can see of how great thinkers and minds have thought about reality. And they all, in my opinion, do great. But I think the people who are really nailing it on the head and who are really saying stuff are the Camus, the Kierkegaards, and the Kafkas, the Dostoevskys, and most fundamentally, I think it's rooted in the Platos, the Socrates, the ancient kind of Platonic idealisms, and the questioning of what the hell are we even doing here? The unexamined life not being worth living. Uh, the notion, the paramount notion I'm trying to say is taking those kind of old Greek ideals of eudaimonia, the ability to question why in life, question structures, and then embracing the absurd, Camus' notion of the absurd, and pitting them together with fringe notions of Nietzschean and more stringent philosophical ideals that are found in the German, you got Hegel and Frege and all these people, but and don't even get me started on Wittgenstein, but let's get this out of the way. Kierkegaard. In my opinion, Kierkegaard is incredible when he looks at the absurd, because he essentially says no matter what you do, the reaction will be the same. And he kind of points to a very nihilistic view of reality. And he says, well, the only thing that his escape, because all these guys have escape patches or escape vaults. And he says, well, essentially, the only thing you can really do is embrace God and the fate or life, whatever's been put forward to you. It's kind of like a predetermination. He's been famous for saying things like hang yourself, don't hang yourself, get married, don't get married, do this, don't that. You don't do that. The result will always be the same. It's really out of your hands. And I think that's I actually have a rebuke on it. I think that's quite weak. I think it's beautiful. I think it's very intelligent to surrender to our omniscient, omniscient, omnipresent force that we do in philosophy a lot of times. But I don't think that's necessarily the way that really nails it on the head, like we see with Camus and some of Sartre. I think Camus is really kind of this Camus, Kafka, Dostoevskian view on the world is very pointing towards that kind of idiosyncratic value towards life, because what they're doing is they're creating real people, real experiences, and real things that we can relate to, and we can then dissect that and use that as our own subjective interpretation of reality. And I think that's where, there's obviously the objective focus on is there a deity or not, and what the hell that means for all of us, and the meaning and the reality of all that. But the individualistic kind of confrontation with reality and fate is a lot more interesting, in my personal opinion. It's not as much of a safety valve parachute from your philosophical kind of downfall with these people. And I think it's fantastic to see things like Kafka's Metamorphosis and Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. I think it's all great, but it hits a point where the shovel has to come to push, or shit hits the fan, right? It's the real world. And I think this is important for what I'm talking about with the Piers Morgan, Harrison Sullivan, and Louis Theroux kind of conversations, because they kind of all just represent three distinctive archetypes, right? You've got Piers Morgan, who's an incredibly intelligent journalist, who kind of uses his power for evil by taking easy targets all the time, or when he takes incredibly smart people, because he always has incredibly smart people, just dying down and listening to what they have to say, and then viewing, but not really contributing anything, right? Or when it's an easy picking, like this Harrison Sullivan guy, beating up the guy, trying to make him look stupid. But actually, the funniest thing ever, which kind of follows a lot of the lessons that were shown, Louis Theroux obviously is more real journalism, and it has a lot of integrity, but there's still narratives, as I'm talking about, model in college, and kind of coming from this type of ivory palace, right? And then coming to someone like Harrison Sullivan, who come from a single mother household. And these are different forces at play fundamentally. So obviously your worldview is probably not going to be the same, is what I'm trying to say. So there is a lack of understanding that there is a necessity at the end of the day to make money, make bread, and do what they have to do. But irrespective of that, not all of us can go to modeling college. Irrespective of that, Piers Morgan is a good display of that, because he didn't go to college, I don't believe. He just went straight into it. But my point here is he used that power for evil, irrespective of the fact that the person who kind of comes from the evil heights used the power for good. And then you have this guy kind of comes from nowhere, and he does the best thing ever, in my opinion, which is actually to call on the hypocrisy of all, and the stupidity of it all, and the absurdity of it all. The thing that I liked about Harrison is he didn't come from a disposition or point of view that he had all the answers. He's just fulfilling his capacities in the world, whatever they may be. He's obviously limited in certain respects, but he's actually freer than 99% of the earth, if we really think about it, because he's not trying to control the weather, the wind, the nature. These people are kind of trying to control the way in which we think about things, and most fundamentally, they're trying to control our perceptions of them. They're trying to control our perceptions of them, and that is what I'm trying to get at. The true freedom is in a lack of the need to control one's perception of you. And it's not predicated on the fact that maybe there's a divine judgment in Kierkegaard's sense or something like that. It's just predicated on the fact that it is a total retention of energy towards the propagation of the self. It goes back to Kaizen and continuous improvement again. But let me make a point that is necessary here. Obviously, these people all come from different sides of the coin. Obviously, everyone has different views. Obviously, everyone has attention. Everyone has a point. Everyone has something to say. But what makes these philosophical thinkers and kind of the real analysis of it in the real time and seeing where the world's going so interesting is the fact that no matter how much we think we are so distinct and so separated by our differences. Actually, we're all living the same experience. We're all humans and have moral judgments that we make on a continual basis, and consciousness and the ability to conversate and discuss it through the limits of our language. That's who I was going to be growing up, actually, was Wittgenstein. But irrespective, before we get to Wittgenstein or anything like that, the point of the matter is sometimes actually Wittgenstein, the limits of our language are not the limits of our life or the limits of our world. Sometimes the limits of our world are the limits of our language. But enough of this tautological bullshit. I'm trying to say, I feel free here now, watching that conundrum, that mess, and seeing what happens when someone tries to convey a narrative so hard that it backfires on them, in the sense that they never considered the fact that they were guilty of the exact same thing they are doing to another person, just in a different respect. That's actually even more telling. The conversations about Mr. Morgan's wife and kind of her immoral actions was very telling, given the fact that the person who pointed that out had devoted his life towards the eradication of such a possibility of a threat, irrespective of how women view him or irrespective of how society views him. It's a very interesting thing to point out, especially from someone as educated as Piers Morgan. Louis Theroux said something interesting in the documentary, which was saying relationships are obviously more than just, these type of basic notions of money and beauty, but, getting along with people and seeing their idiosyncrasies and things that make them kind of peculiar or interesting. I completely agree with that. I'm not going to take anything away from that. I think he did a great job, but I do think we need to cut a little bit deeper here, because necessity and resources are always important, and there is a little bit of randomness to the world. The main idea I'm trying to get across here is we are more alike than we'd like to think. And before you cast a judgment on someone, reserve the capacity for the same type of capacity they may have to change or have deeper kind of notions of how the world really is. Because that's what happened in that interview was, as I've spoken about multiple times, there was a spark. The underdog had actually surmounted this big bad Goliath. And the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And the momentum Mr. Sullivan may garner from this is very interesting, because that truly was a masterclass in not just rage baiting, but displaying hypocrisy, of course, but displaying the fact that perceptions are so easy and they die on a whim. They're so easy to cultivate, yet they fall so quickly, because the tides of how we think are like leaves in the wind. They blow all the time. They're just different. And it's hard to imagine what life would be if you woke up one day and you were a mosquito, right? It's just hard. And the point is, you would never think of that unless Kafka wrote about it, right? To actually dive into that mold and think about the reality of someone's life from their perspective and how it is to embrace it is almost a supernatural power in today's world. It's not just empathy, it's intelligence, it's higher consciousness, it's an ability to see into things that other people fundamentally cannot see. It's an ability to inhabit someone's shoes without ever being them. And I think that's the point, is how do you inhabit someone's shoes without walking in them? It's almost impossible, but what you have to do is you have to be willing to try. You have to be willing to try and see things that are not seeable, and that's where faith comes in, or whatever mystical kind of deity, or the capacity for these type of external forces you may want to come in. But I find myself inspired, touched, and a little bit terrified about these revelations, because we really are not that intelligent as a species, if you really think about it. And we really dig into this type of notion that we should be putting people down and making these grand moral proclamations, when actually we're in no positions to do so ourselves. So apart from generic notions of improve yourself every day and think deeper and be empathetic to others, I really want to say the beauty of life is in the unexpected and is in the different. It's in the unknown unknowns. It's in the stars above. It's in the things we haven't found out yet. It's in the discovering. That's why I talk about Socrates and Plato. I don't want to get dumbed down by the Platonic form ideals, but the fundamental notion or maxim principle of the unexamined life is not worth living is a bloody strong principle, not because of the words, but because of the fact that the person who said it died for it. And the inability to kind of differentiate moral proclamations, laws, or maxims from the individual writing them, or ascribing to a judgment to the same individual who's writing them, is a fundamental flaw in today's society. I'm thinking specifically about Immanuel Kant. I always thought Immanuel Kant was a Prussian genius until you start to kind of run into problems like the baby dilemma, the trolley dilemma, notions of fate, the interventions. It's easy to say that I'm going to stick by or abide by rigid maxims or principles like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, until you're actually confronted with it in person. That's what makes a human experience so unique. That's what makes the Raskolnikov so interesting, is because they're living a distinctly human experience. So the fundamental answer to everything almost is embrace the humanity. Don't take a parachute and start to say that everything's the way it is because of God. Don't take a parachute and start to say, oh, they're just bigoted or they don't know anything, and we need to ascribe by these all known truths because then you take the place of a deity anyway. What's the point? I'm not saying dumb yourself down. I'm not saying live small. I never ever would say that. I'm just saying before you get up and start to proclaim righteousness, think about what righteousness even entails. And think about the fact that righteousness is just a 5 or 6, I don't know how many words, but it's just a word, it's a lettered word that only has the amount of meaning ascribed to it by the people around you. And you keep kind of going out and out and out and out and out in those circles, you see that the world is a big place, actually. And the galaxy is a bloody, even larger place. And then don't even get me started on fifth, sixth dimension, but it's a lot more complicated than we may believe. And I don't profess to have all the answers, but that enough is an answer. I hope this resonated with someone.